found someone who will not question his authoritarian impulses. After all, he's promised to be a dictator on day one. But remember that story I mentioned that Vance once talked about Trump as America's Hitler? Given the coverage it's received, you're probably all very familiar with what Vance said, but you might not know how we know about it. Well, Vance actually put those words in writing in a 2016 text message to my next guest, who's been sounding the alarm about the danger of a Trump-Vance ticket. Joining me now is Josh McLaurin. He's a Democratic state senator in Georgia, and he was also JD Vance's roommate during their time at Yale Law School. Josh, thank you so much for joining me. I know the most important question, of course, for everyone, I think, is who is JD Vance today? And I definitely want to talk with you about that. But you know way back in law school. So what was he like then?
Hi, Jen. Glad to join you. You know, the reports that he was smart and personable one-on-one, they're correct. I think, it's just how he's using it now that's of so much concern. At the time, he seemed really thoughtful and unwilling to toe the party line in a number of respects. I've mentioned that I had a thoughtful conversation with him about the Second Amendment. He said at the time he liked Sherrod Brown, which is just sort of ironic given all the politics that he's involved in now. And so at the time in 2010 to 2011, when we roomed together, I sort of thought, this is a guy who is smart enough and could be motivated enough, has enough presence that he could remake or influence the direction of the Republican Party. I mean, talk about wishing on a monkey's paw, right, to see how he's using that talent now. But he was considered thoughtful. I've heard from mutual friends they couldn't believe now that he would do something like this.
Yeah, I bet it's been hard for you and all of your people who knew him long ago. Now, you put out this text message he sent, where he called Trump America's Hitler, something that I think there are people out there who relate to. But I guess the question I have is, do you think he still believes that and he's just okay with it now, or what's your assessment?
What it seems like is that, unlike a lot of Republican politicians who I think you could characterize as just empty suits, who will say whatever they need to be powerful, JD has allowed some deeper anger to motivate him here. That was something that I could sense a little bit when I knew him as a roommate. I mean, obviously, he was skeptical of the law school environment. He's written about that. But he had a very caustic sense of humor behind closed doors about some of the students and events at Yale. And that's one of the reasons we didn't get along so well, because I didn't want to make my identity, this kind of defined in opposition to the law school environment. I mean, I ran the comedy show there. I was having a pretty good time. And so what it seems like is that JD has convinced himself that this caricature of his political opponents, whether it's the left or the media, what have you, is so evil in his mind that it justifies a turn to Trump or to getting rid of some of the principles he used to have so that he can beat his opponent. I mean, you routinely have heard him over the last few years say things like, we need to destroy our opposition. I mean, at the RNC, he gave an interview where he said we need to punish Joe Biden and Kamala Harris by electing Donald Trump. So these are not aspirational statements, right? These are the statements of a guy whose anger and contempt, I think, are motivating him to be involved in politics.
And what do you think? I mean, he's obviously went through a lot as a child. I don't know if there's something more recent, but what do you think is motivating that anger and contempt? Is it just tapping into kind of the Trumpism and MAGAism of it all? Is it something else? What is motivating him to have kind of evolved in some capacity as he has?
I mean, that's hard, right? And obviously, I'm not a licensed psychiatrist. I have referenced the
None
joke
of us
that,
are.
men would
Fair.
rather run for... No, of course, but men would rather run for office than go to therapy, right? I mean, I think one of the things that's really troublesome about the new right generally, or whatever they're calling it, that JD's part of with Peter Thiel's money, is that it seems like a lot of guys who honestly just couldn't cut it within what they would call the establishment, and they're seeking alternative pathways to power. I mean, even the professor who helped launch JD Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, and some of the circles he ran in at Yale Law School, they were still powerful. They were just an alternate, pathway to the power, the influence that he wanted, that weren't like the exact, the biggest, highest profile mainstream elite circles that you would think of at Yale. And so at the end of the day, it's just kind of this competing elitism. It's not somehow a replacement of elitism or a thoughtful critique of elitism. And I think plenty of people have said that about him, that he has become a venture capitalist. He is friends with billionaires. I mean, at the end of the day, he's just offering Americans a replication of the things that he purportedly wants to criticize.
No question. I mean, you also must have known his wife, Usha, in a law school as well. And as I know it's hard to know what people are thinking, I think no political spouse signs up for this typically, right? That's true in any political party. But I just wonder, as you were watching her speech, what you think she's thinking. I mean, do you think she believes in this? She loves her husband, of course. It's just hard to wrap my head around, I guess I'm saying.
I can't really speculate as to Usha's intentions. What I will say is that I really had a place in my heart for JD. I mean, I knew that we had a lot of differences in terms of conservative versus liberal. Obviously, we had very different childhoods, but even though we had a couple of rifts here and there, even our first year, I always wanted a way to make it work. I thought that he was a thoughtful guy. I was looking for common ground. And that's a lot of why I reached out in 2016 to ask him if the Trump moment was disturbing him as much as it was disturbing me. And I got the answer I was looking for because he was a thoughtful guy. And, you know, like I've said, it's not just a flip flop. I mean, he had such an incisive critique of Trump at that time that he was the fruit of the Republican Party's collective neglect, that a demagogue would come along to exploit that failure. You know, again, that's sophisticated analysis that it still holds true. And so I found an ally in him in that respect. We had even discussed maybe writing an op-ed together in 2016, and we were looking for the right topic. Is it civility, unity? What is it? But obviously those conversations dropped off after Trump won. So as to his wife or any of the other friends who have kept up with him longer than 2016, all I have to say is I think at the end of the day, you know, it kind of doesn't matter who you are privately or what's going through your mind. If you're willing to put on this performance for the American people and activate the level of anger and contempt in the Republican base that he's willing to do, then that's what you own.
You heard that right. JD Vance's ex-roommate just exposed Vance's wife live on MSNBC. As you heard right there, he was pretty much saying that if you are choosing to ride with JD Vance, you are basically a sellout and you're choosing to put on a performance. But not only does she have to put on a performance, she also has to own that lifestyle. You see, Vance's wife, Usha, used to be a Democrat, but she eventually switched over to voting Republican to support her husband. And now she seems to be off the deep end supporting her husband in any way she can. But as Vance's ex-roommate said, both Vance and his wife are pretty smart, so they understand what they're doing. They both know that they're blowing things out of proportion and that they're lying, and they don't actually believe anything that they're saying, at least not to the same degree. But there is far more benefit to going along with what they're saying than to not. And honestly, it's kind of too late to go back on anything at this point. Because Vance's ideas are so far to the right now, if he tries to backpedal at all, Trump supporters would try to hang him like they did Mike Pence. And his wife has it way worse. Because while Vance was always a little bit more conservative, she always tended to be more liberal. So if she, for example, were to try to divorce Vance, she would forever be known as the person who sucked up to Vance and threw away her own beliefs. So she would have a hard time making friends or, finding new employment, all of this stuff just because of her situation. And that was true years ago, so imagine how much worse it is now. But that's not even the worst of it, because there's a lot of Republicans who already don't like her just because she's not white. So just imagine if she tried to back out now, they would be attacking her way more than they already are. So I think that's what Vance's ex-roommate was trying to say when he said that they had to own it. They can't go back because it's just simply too late to. So ultimately, that's just who they are now. They both are just sellouts who are doing what they're doing because that's what benefits them the most, regardless of what they personally believed in, or at least used to believe in.